On the pod and off the field. Next season, what are the plans for the New York Football Giants under center? Is Daniel Jones going to be on this roster? Will he be the interim quarterback for a young top draft pick? Or maybe outside the building is where Big Blue needs to look. We break down all of the angles of the Daniel Jones saga coming up next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. And while we continue to cover the team on a week-to-week basis, and we'll have the Washington Commanders preview up for you on Friday, the other thing that's going on is everything else not related to what's happening on the football field. And this became interesting, Andy, because you sent over to me, we've been noodling around on this, right? Fans, hey, it's tank time, it's top draft pick, it's Caleb Williams, it's all of these things. But there is more than one, or maybe even two or three ways that the New York Football Giants could enter into next season when it comes to the QB position.
Yeah, no question. And we talked about Victor Cruz. I think the reaction that came out was Victor Cruz came out and said, it's time to move off of Daniel Jones. I've seen enough. Like, for everyone that has had the criticism, that seemed to be a tip in the cap of like a guy that everyone loves, the former Giant, making that claim. Then recently, Eli Manning comes out and he is in support of sticking with Daniel Jones as the long-term solution, which is a hard thing for Giants fans to hear right now after what they've seen this season. Eli Manning goes on to say they saw Daniel Jones, they were around him, they had him for a year, and they trusted that. Hey, this is a kid that has a bunch of upside. That's what Manning said on the Marchand Hour and Sports Media podcast. And he said he's still in the first year of the offense. He played extremely well. He can run. He's tough. Makes the throws, just unfortunately, tough year with injuries. I think you got to trust the quarterback. So, Adam, does Eli Manning saying that mean anything to you?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, no. And by the way, Victor Cruz saying what he said doesn't really mean anything either. One of the parts of that Eli Manning quote too, he's going to come back. He's going to be healthy. He works hard. He's a great teammate. He does all the intangible things really, really well. Now, here's the problem. From an Eli Manning perspective, it's like probably impossible for him not to run it through his own filter. Like, I did all the intangible things right. I always carried myself the right way. I was always a hard worker. The big difference is, though, when you look at that quote and he says he's going to come back, he's going to be healthy. Oh, sorry. Like, there's no guarantee that Daniel Jones is going to be healthy. And unfortunately, that is the difference here. Eli Manning spent years of his career just getting his butt handed to him week after week and standing back up, doing the shoulder slump and getting back into the huddle and going for the next play. I do believe that, like, if not for the injuries, we might talk about Daniel Jones a little bit differently here for the most part, because you might get these little glimmers, even in a really bad season like this year, where you say, but he's still out there. He can be that guy. Now we're talking about big cost. We're talking about inconclusive sample size. And we're talking about a guy that we don't have a guarantee. When is he going to come back? Is he going to be fully healthy? Will he not be the same mobile quarterback that he has been early in his career? So from the Eli Manning perspective, I get it. He's heavily involved with the organization now, and I love that. And I never want that to stop. But come on. Out of the two, you would have been shocked if it was Eli Manning and said, you know what? I don't think the kid's got it. I think we should probably cut ties. It's never going to happen, right?
Yeah, keep in mind that like Daniel Jones was the bridge of Eli Manning, like going off into the sunset. They know each other. They were on the team together. He was there during the Swan Song. Obviously, Eli is very in tune with the organization.
I would have liked it better if Eli came out and said, well, I didn't think it was quite time for me to hang it up, quite frankly. Week 3 felt like a little bit early for me. I don't know. Just saying.
Yeah, just maybe they shouldn't have taken him and gotten away from me. That would have been the pure crazy comment that you wouldn't have seen out of left field. But yes, you take it with a grain of salt. He's obviously in with ownership. He reflects back and says, I had some tough years. The media was really tough on me, but I persevered through it. I think Daniel has the same personality. But unfortunately for Eli Manning and for Daniel Jones just hasn't had a history of staying healthy. And that's really the challenge. Like, if he's out on the field, he can still be a serviceable quarterback in whatever capacity you think he can be. But the problem is we just don't know if he's going to be healthy anymore.
Exactly. Again, like, that is as big a factor as anything we're going to talk about today. Now, when we turn our attention to the draft and this idea that one thing that I wanted to put into everyone's mind here, because we're also going to take a look at free agency next off season at every single level, big dollar guys. Well, how do the Giants get to the place of going and getting Kirk Cousins? I'm not saying that's the case. There's the example, right? Well, we'll paint that picture for you. But here's a little reminder. Going all the way back to 2013, I've got dozens of quarterbacks that were taken. But among guys taken, let's just even say in the top 10, because back in 2013, remember a guy named EJ Manuel for the Buffalo Bills? Never panned out, 16th overall. Blake Bortles was 3rd overall in 2014. Did not turn out to be a franchise guy. Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, they went 1-2 in 2015. Neither one of them, now different levels of success, certainly serviceable quarterbacks in the NFL, but did not rise to that level. Shockingly, Andy, you will find out that Goff going number 1 overall in 2016 is actually the right choice when we reflect back on it now, as his time in Detroit has looked great. Trubisky, 2nd overall in 2017. Mahomes went 10th that year. Mayfield, number 1 in 2018. Darnold was 3rd that season. Josh Allen went 7th. And then you even had Rosen go 10th in that one. Guess who went last in that year's draft in the first round? Lamar Jackson. Should have maybe been right up there at the top of that list. When you look back at these, the only year that you really tap into and say, oh, baby, it was clear cut, 2020. You got Burrow at 1. You have Tua at 5. You have Herbert at 6. All those guys, even with the injuries with Tua, Herbert, troubles, all those guys are hits, right? So deep classes can work out. But the very next year, Trevor Lawrence went 1. Zach Wilson, number 2. That's a miss. Trey Lance, already not worth that. You moved off of him out of your franchise. Justin Fields at 11. And then Mac Jones at 15. My point that I just had to be long-winded and drill down on here is having the top 1, 2, or 3rd pick in the draft and getting a quarterback does not guarantee you that you find the franchise guy. It improves your chances that he's that guy, but history tells you there's as many misses, if not more, than there are hits at the top of the draft when it comes to the QB position.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part, is that when you look at it and you say the Giants need to get a new franchise quarterback, and you're like, okay, we're going to put all our chips in one of these guys. What I think everyone thinks is that when you just hit the button, the new guy comes in and he's going to revitalize the entire organization. You've seen that didn't work out with teams like Zach Wilson, who have gotten off him, Trey Lance, etc. You mentioned guys like EJ Manuel, like he was in Buffalo for a cup of coffee and then he left. Josh Rosen didn't even get a full year and then was jettisoned for Kyler Murray. You look at it and say those are all top 10-ish picks that we're talking about, and they did not pan out. Even after all the draft pundits and evaluators said these guys are locks to be the first 3 or 4 quarterbacks taken off the board.
Yeah.
Adam, with no certainties, it doesn't necessarily mean just to say we got to go get our quarterback in the draft, that you have to use the number 1 pick on the quarterback or the number 4 pick or whatever you have, because it still is kind of a crapshoot.
Now, the reality being that when you feel like you have that chance, you want to take advantage of it, because the other route is, and by the way, in the deep years, it seems like it's better, right? Even this past season, by the way, when you think about, well, it went Young, Stroud, and then Richardson at 4, but Stroud has been an absolute revelation. Young, well, you're still going to want to see how that goes. Richardson, injured, right? All these things are factors. So when it's a deep QB class, you feel a little bit more confident in it. The other benefit is obvious. Hey, listen, we don't have to give up multiple first-round picks in years going forward in order to go get our guy in the year that we see him and we feel like all the vetting happened. So there is a mentality of like, well, you have to take the shot. It's why the Giants take Daniel Jones 6th overall a handful of years ago. You had to take the shot. Now, that's a perfect example of looking back. Did they? Should they, right? Or should they have treated it like, here is a top 10 pick and where is our position of need? So with that in mind, let's paint the picture first that the Giants do go ahead and draft a quarterback at the top end of this thing. What is your scenario for the Giants going into next season? Is Daniel Jones the day 1 starter as your bridge quarterback? Are you fully ready to go with the rookie no matter what, and you just deal with having that cap hit on the books? How do you want this to play out for Big Blue if the premise is top 2 pick and QB coming in the door?
Yeah, I think the answer is very simple, and it's whether or not you're a guy that still believes in Daniel Jones, or he's not the answer, or he's good or bad or whatever. Is, if healthy, unequivocally, Daniel Jones starts week 1 for the Giants in the upcoming season, at least in my opinion. And it's twofold.
If they took Caleb Williams, you'd say week 1 unequivocally Daniel Jones starts if healthy?
Yeah, of course.
That's insane.
You don't
Hold on, that's insane.
You don't necessarily.
Wait.
Let me
I'm
let
just
me
saying, you go into camp and Caleb Williams looks good and understands the part and is connecting with Jalen Hyatt and looks like he's ready to go. You say like, "Oops, sorry, you'll wait your turn."
Sure, of course. If he looks like he's absolutely amazing, Daniel Jones breaks his kneecap again, does whatever he is. The whole point is
No,
the
no, no, no,
Giants
no, no.
already
Hold on,
committed.
hold on. I want to because this is a good one to drill down on.
I,
Not about
I
breaking things up again. Both these guys are healthy. They both go into camp and they play even. They look like they are equal in camp. Not Caleb Williams lights the world on fire. Not Daniel, whatever. They look equal. And you say Daniel Jones gets the nod.
It's not even a question. If they are equal, it's not even a
Why?
question that Daniel Jones starts because the way
Why?
the NFL works is that when you have a veteran and you have a rookie QB and they look about even, you go with the veteran QB to give the rookie QB a little bit more time to get seasoned because you can always bench a veteran quarterback and be able to bring in the rookie and get a spark and give him time to learn after he's done it. There are very few instances, Adam, where it helps the mental psyche of a rookie quarterback where you say, yeah, let's start him. Then 2 weeks in, you're like, this was way over his head. We got to bench him. Then you pull him back in again. That's the worst way to progress a rookie QB's career, in my opinion.
Okay, the up and down, the in and out. I can understand that part of it. Young has started in Carolina, like going through that. Now he got I think hurt a little tweak, and Darnold came in and blah blah blah. Now purely based on play, I think now the spot I agree with you is if you say that it's Caleb, we're using Caleb Williams as the example. If Caleb Williams is drafted and he's in camp and he looks good, and you put him out there, what I do agree with you is it's like that's it. You are now going with Caleb Williams. There is no benching him. It is now his role. And I don't think that the Giants would treat it any other way. It would be you are now the franchise quarterback. And Daniel Jones, you understand if anything were to happen to Caleb Williams, you may get a shot to show that you can be a productive quarterback and to maybe tease another team to spend $40 million on you in a trade or some percentage of it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But I disagree with the idea that it is an automatic. The recent history actually tells us that typically rookie quarterbacks, when they get taken, they go in. They go with the young guy. They go with them early. Now, results on that can certainly vary, right? But if you want to look over at Green Bay, and they have a history of this not only with Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love, they've done the thing where they had the guy sitting on the bench for years. Now, in one example, he's a Hall of Fame quarterback and now plays for the Jets with an injury. The other example is Jordan Love, who came in and kind of looked okay. And maybe the Packers realized that they actually still need a quarterback. So I don't think there's any there's not one right route to it, but I would be shocked if you're going to tell me that Daniel Jones, I wouldn't understand the reason for it. Like, it's just the learning process has to start now for a young quarterback and for a rookie quarterback for a team that, at least in theory, I'll give one caveat, goes out in free agency and adds something to this offensive line and make sure they put a good line in front of him, right? Like, that
Well,
would be
yeah,
the
I
one
mean,
thing
that's
where you
another
go,
caveat. We have a better team. We have all this different stuff.
no,
That's
no, 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 no,
also
no, no. I'm just saying that you improve that line because you don't want to. By the way, it's like you want to put out Daniel Jones to take the first couple of licks and have him hurt himself. But I fundamentally disagree. The franchise is ready to move off of Daniel Jones. You're not putting him out there to hold off Caleb Williams. Like, it doesn't make
okay.
any sense.
Great segue because I have a question for you. You mentioned the Brett Favre into Aaron Rodgers into
Yeah.
Jordan Love era. Who would you say is the best quarterback in the league right now?
Joe Burrow, probably.
You would say Joe Burrow is better than Patrick Mahomes.
In this season, yes, he has been.
That is that is probably for us to talk about for another time. I
In
think
this
people will
season, he
get.
has. Like, and again, now that's based
Well,
on
no. All the stats would suggest that Patrick Mahomes has played better than Joe Burrow because Joe Burrow came in with a calf
came with the
injury in the first
injuries and
three
left
games
himself off there. Yeah, I
was
mean, listen,
terrible.
am I taking the last 5 weeks versus the first 6 weeks? Whatever it is. Bottom line, you want one of those two guys say to the guy, I get it. You're going to use the Alex Smith example here with Patrick Mahomes. Okay, great. Like,
Yeah, well, no, but listen, Alex Smith was a productive first round NFL quarterback who had
Daniel
gotten his
Jones is
team
not
to
a
the playoffs.
productive first round NFL quarterback. So I'll stop you right
But
there.
but you can't say that he's not a productive first round quarterback if he leads his team to a playoff win where he's the best player on the field. Like that
That's a year
that
removed. You're
you,
you're a year removed from that. If this is last year coming out of the playoffs, but the Giants are still looking to the future and they bring in a quarterback, it's a different story. You are now another injury-filled year and an unproductive one at that for Daniel Jones. And by the way, spec on spec, Daniel Jones does not sniff the career of Alex Smith by any stretch of the imagination.
of course not. But when we're talking about a young QB that you've committed money to, right? That won a playoff game for you. The natural progression would be to say, hey, look at the way that they treated things with Patrick Mahomes. You knew he was ready. You knew he was prepared. You knew he was a guy that was the future of the franchise. So we ease him into it rather than throw him out there week one. I do agree that I don't think that there's a stone cold lock answer. To me, the fact that Daniel Jones's contract is there and the fact if he is healthy, you have that ability to ease the player in, then I think you do it.
Okay, having the ability is one thing. I can appreciate that. Two parts to this. One, there's a big difference who Patrick Mahomes is now versus the way that he was perceived at the time of the draft. There's a reason why Kansas City got him 10th in that draft rather than taking anywhere earlier, right? He ends up being the second quarterback taken, but Trubisky went second overall in 2017. Winston went 2 picks behind Mahomes at 12. So there's perceptually a difference there. The other part of this is we're labeling Daniel Jones as a veteran quarterback, and he has been in the league, so I guess he does get that title. However, Alex Smith was brought there to do that thing. They brought him in saying, hey, you are a veteran quarterback. You will be here until we get the heir apparent, and when the time is right, we will move you out of the way. Daniel Jones, there's no conversations need be had with Daniel Jones like that. It's not the same apples-to-apples scenario. And last but not least, when I talk about Mahomes taking 10th overall, big difference again between being taken first overall, second overall, and 10th overall. There is a perceptual difference there around where you value the quarterback. Now, anybody taken near the top 10 or even in the first round, you can argue at the QB position has the tag of he is our franchise guy, but there's a difference perceptually about when are they ready? When do they go in, right? The guys that get taken towards the top of the draft, and we've seen the history, some of them are hits, some of them are misses, but the guys that get taken right near the top in the first 2 picks, those are guys they say they are definitely 100% the franchise quarterback, and we can make a strong case they are ready week 1 to go in there, week 1 to develop. They have all the tools that even if it's going to be a struggle, we believe they'll progress through that. A guy taken 10th, 15th, 20th in the draft, it means that, hey, there's something here we want to work on. There's a reason why 9 other teams potentially pass on this guy. Now, shame on all of them when we look back at Patrick Mahomes. But that, I think there are these nuanced differences to this. And my last statement that I would make about it, if you want to go that path, then that means, and maybe that's the next part of this conversation, because I know we have several angles we want to hit here, then that means that you should be open to not taking Caleb Williams number 1 overall, because it means that you look at maybe all these quarterbacks as being closer, right? So maybe you could back down and still get a really good in the deep class, a good guy and a prospect you like. But that's there's a difference here, right? Because that means that you are not necessarily pot committed, because you're selling me on the idea, well, we already committed money to Daniel Jones, so he deserves an opportunity to go out there and play. If you're taking the dude number 1 overall, you've already stopped the Daniel Jones journey as the Giants quarterback.
Well, guess what? That's not how Joe Schoen views it, and I'll tell you why. Because there had never been a quarterback that had their 5th-year option decline that then signed a multi-year deal. So when he declined that 5th-year option, Joe Schoen was telling you, Daniel Jones is not the long-term solution. And then you know what happened? A funny thing happened. Joe Schoen decided to give him a 4-year contract. That wasn't me that gave him the contract. Okay. That was Joe Schoen that did it.
Watch me blow this thing apart for you, pal. First of all, historically, there's probably very few situations where the 5th-year option was declined and then the quarterback was signed to a new contract after that, right? So we're in rarefied air here. But guess what?
Only time.
No. But listen. So Daniel Jones, we declined the 5th-year option. Why? We do not believe you are the franchise quarterback. Plays it out. Like what they see. Daniel Jones, you are the franchise quarterback. Here's a contract. Guess what? Following year, looks bad. Injury plague, team disaster. Joe Schoen can 100% turn around and say, guess what? Not the franchise quarterback anymore. The proof is in the pudding. He's already shown that he's going to be influenced by 100%. He's going to flip-flop back and forth. We can knock Joe Schoen for that a little bit here. We can knock about whether or not was John Mara, Joe Schoen, and Brian Dable all on the same page when it came to the evaluation of Daniel Jones. Was there disagreements? Was it pushed one way or the other? We could make the case that Joe Schoen walked in the door and said, he is not my franchise guy. And John Mara said, okay, decline the 5th-year option, but let's see how he plays it out. It goes the way it goes. You earn it. Coach of the year for Brian Dable. Hey, we've got to. We've been backed into a corner. Now, you and I can disagree individually, collectively, the fan base, about whether or not you should have said, well, look at the year. We can't not give him the contract. We have to do it now, right? The other side of that would be, and Joe Schoen can be in the wrong, John Mara, the Giants, could be like, it was a great season. Nevertheless, we do not believe him to be the franchise guy. The perception war was lost by the Giants in the decision-making process over the last couple of seasons.
You know what, Adam? I'm going to say something that we haven't talked about on this podcast that I
Is
just
it
want to.
football related?
Well, kind of. It
Oh,
depends if
okay.
you think the front office is football related or not.
Yeah.
I am very frustrated
Ooh.
with the perception that people have that they say John Mara is the reason why Daniel Jones was re-signed. And the reason why I say that is there's not been a single report from any credible reporter on the beat that says John Mara walked in and said, Joe Schoen, you need to sign this guy. That doesn't exist. Where even in the
No, but
cracks of this
the
season,
track record exists. The track record at least exists that he has been someone who has been willing to insert himself into discussions about team decisions with the GMs.
uh, agreed. But there's never been a report saying
Sure.
that he said you have to make this decision, you have to sign him under any
Yeah, yeah.
circumstances. And we give praise for last season to Joe Schoen for the moves that he makes. We give praise to Brian Daboll for being the coach of the year
Mhm.
in the NFL. And then when things go awry the next season, we say those two front office people never wanted Daniel Jones. It clearly was someone else. Get Brian Daboll the guy that he wants. And we're removing responsibility away from said coach of the year and said amazing GM from being part of the people that put all this together to begin with.
Oh, of course. No, and by the way, I agree with you 100%. Like that's why I say Joe Schoen has gone back and forth on this, right? It's not just because, by the way, you don't. I mean, you said everything correct there, right? You hiring these guys, you say my hands are off. You guys make the choices. Just be open to the possibility that Daniel Jones can convince you he's worth it, right? Okay, we're open to that. He showed it. We like him. Here's the contract. Now, again, is it good, bad, right, wrong, indifferent that this is the way these last 2 years have played out? Responsibility is shared by all. And the hierarchy goes, let's say the hierarchy, it probably goes Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, John Mara, if we want to talk about like who has their hands on this thing, right? Joe Schoen's putting the team together. He's providing the players. Mara's signing the checks, but Joe Schoen is resetting the evaluation process, right? Whole new scouting department. Brian Daboll, the coaching staff, they're entrusted to take these players and maximize them. One year he does, the following year he doesn't. What decisions were made this offseason? Players being brought back or otherwise? Where do we spend free agent money? That's on Joe Schoen. So I agree with you. I think two things can be true at different levels. I think that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll deserve the credit for the things they accomplished, and they deserve the blame for things that have not gone well. John Mara gets like this little Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are at the dinner table, and John Mara's at the kids' table. He's just off to the side, and he's definitely mucking with some things, right? Like he's put his finger in the dessert, and everyone thinks it tastes a little bit off, and we're not sure who's responsible. Like I think that's like that can be true because the track record says I have done this. Like I have been known to do this thing, right?
Right. I agree. John Mara's track record is that Joe Schoen so far's track record has been flip flop on decisions where I think I'm showing conviction. Like we said, the decline, the resign. If he does decide to draft a quarterback in the first round, he'd be identifying that signing the long term deal was a mistake and that declining the fifth year option was actually the right thing to do. Right.
100%. And I think the only thing, and this isn't like it's not a feather in Joe Schoen's cap if it goes this way, but I always come back to it's like don't throw the good money after the bad here. Make a mistake, admit that you make the mistake, and then go about fixing it. Right? Don't turn. And this maybe comes back to just very briefly to the idea of if you have Daniel Jones on here and you paid him that contract, even if you draft a quarterback number 1 overall, Daniel Jones, the week 1 starter for a lot of other reasons as well. But you go, well, no. Like take away, use the Brian Daboll model. If you earn the reps you get, and we can talk about how this season looks a lot different when it comes to you earn your reps. Seems like some guys didn't get the chance to. Nevertheless, you earn your reps, right? So let's not talk about who's making 40 million and who's on a rookie scale deal with a 5th-year option. Let's just talk about who earns the opportunity to play. Now, let's get back to that another time because there's 18
Yes.
more layers to this. Now let's think about. So we paint the picture of Daniel Jones is here. Let's talk about who's on the free agent wire for the quarterback position. There's a lot of guys to look at here and paint the scenario of by whatever means necessary. Maybe Daniel Jones is not ready for the start of the season, and maybe they want to have a veteran in front of their rookie. What are the ways in which the Giants can go about making sure they don't walk down another disastrous path to start next year?
Yeah, so that's the first thing that we did was look at some of the free agent quarterbacks because if you're not going to take one in the draft, you probably have to look at who's available. Now, there's plenty of guys that are still available out there right now. They're not on rosters for a whole host of reasons, but probably not any good ones for the Giants. When you look at quarterbacks with experience that are going to be coming off a deal, you have guys like Kirk Cousins, who's a free agent coming off a terrible Achilles injury. You have Ryan Tannehill coming off of injuries, now benched for Will Levis.
Sure.
You have Jacoby Brissett, who hasn't seen the field in Washington. Our own Tyrod Taylor is a free agent. Then you get into the Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston,
Drew Lock,
Baker
baby.
Mayfield.
Little shout out to Drew Lock.
Yes, and even a guy like Gardner Minshew, who's looked pretty good so far this year, is another name on the list where you're like, okay, there's a whole host of serviceable guys. Then there's huge amounts of question marks, like, I don't know, guys like Drew Lock, guys like Tyler Huntley. You have Josh Dobbs, who's looked good for a couple games, but ultimately got banned for the Cardinals.
Anyone? Nate Sudfeld?
Yeah, Nate Sudfeld, Mason Rudolph. Do you remember his claim to fame is getting his helmet thrown at him by Myles Garrett? Like, that's the rest of the crop that you're talking about.
Maybe a hot bowl of Blaine Gabbert, if that's your cut of slice of pie.
That's the crew that we're talking about there.
Yes.
I think the first thing that you do is say, if Daniel Jones is on this roster, Kirk Cousins, there's not a scenario that exists, and I think you'll agree, where Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins are on the Giants roster together in 2024.
No, Kirk Cousins, no. Ryan Tannehill, no. Even a guy like, going out to probably Jameis Winston, no. Baker Mayfield, for whatever he is, or like all these guys, for whatever they are, aren't. And Kirk Cousins is the best among them. But all of these guys are no's for the simple fact that the money, it's just never going to make sense because they're going to command something. Even guys that are average or journeyman or partial backups, guys that have played and started, are probably going to get something. Like, you're going to be talking north of $15 to $20 million, which is nuts for guys that could be sitting on the bench here, or that could be minimal starters while you wait for the next guy to come in. So I agree with you there. Would you agree? And let's also remind everybody, like, let's also say that inside of this scenario, there's the world where the Giants accidentally win a couple of games here. We can talk about the Dable angle of this, and that maybe that top QB is not a viable option, right? So we're exploring a lot of different things here. Would you agree? I talked about this man before. To me, Gardner Minshew is the guy that you circle on this list as right price point and right value for usage. So Daniel Jones isn't 100% healthy, so he can't play for you. And you get the quarterback or you don't, and you want to have someone just to get the ball rolling here. Gardner Minshew, I think if he had a clean-cut look and, shaved his mustache, would probably be a starting NFL quarterback. Some of it, I think, is perceptual about the way this guy looks.
I think Gardner Minshew is one name that's pretty good. I'm curious to see what he demands because he's shown he's a guy that can step in for a couple of games, a la like a Tyrod Taylor, and win football games for the team. He can throw the ball pretty accurately, good completion percentage, can get the ball into the wide receiver's hands. I think the most likely scenario that I would see would be either him or Jacoby Brissett, they've both shown the ability to stabilize things in certain areas in certain degrees. So when I look at that list, I think those would be the two most realistic outcomes for us. But Adam, you also mentioned the idea of, like, if the Giants mess around and they win this game against Washington, or they mess around and win a couple games down the road, and they're drafting 7th or 8th, you may look at it and say, well, the top 2 QBs are gone and we don't have another first round grade on a quarterback. Now we're in the 2nd or the 3rd round, and you're thinking about, like, do we now have a developmental quarterback and a bridge quarterback and Daniel Jones coming off an injury? That also feels like a whole nother scenario that the Giants could find themselves in.
Yeah, and this is the part about the Brian Dable angle of it all. It's something that you've heard people talk about. So, okay, there's no world that they're going to move on from Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. And I agree with that. Like, I really do not see an instance where that's going to happen. We have heard some people inside of Mike Kafka's camp don't expect him to be back, and there could be wholesale changes everywhere underneath the Brian Dable and Joe Schoen category. Now, that being the case, though, I think to your point, it's like the only concern here is that the Giants, or Brian Dable, like, he still needs to show that this team is good. And I mean, not in terms of wins or losses, but like good enough to compete, right? This team is painting a picture where they are the worst team in the NFL by a significant margin. They're about to play we'll talk about Washington tomorrow. Sam Howell right now leads the league in average yards per game through the air. It's insane. And they're considered to be a bad team. They sold off key players at the deadline. So there is a world where going 2-15 has to at least get you to the precipice of saying, well, maybe Brian Dable should be fired. Like right now, getting 5 wins while crushing your draft, your outlook and changing the perception marginally. It's not going to change our opinion, but that might be what's required to make sure you thread this needle of keeping Dable and still moving on. And then you're in this spot. Daniel Jones hurt, not hurt, bridge quarterback, and maybe waiting a little bit longer to get that next QB for the franchise.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Adam, the question on this feels like the Giants are going to bring in at least someone to compete with Daniel Jones, if not to take over his job. Is
Yeah,
the feeling right now? And remember, like cooler heads can prevail, things can change, headwinds can change. What if Caleb Williams suffers a terrible injury? Now there's only one quarterback at the top. There's still
sure.
a lot of things that could happen between now and then that may change the perception of what the Giants want to do. But at the end of the day, it feels like there's 4 or 5 different options for the Giants to go with. If Daniel Jones is healthy, that seems like one of the most likely. But is there a world that Daniel Jones is not on this roster at all come 2024?
That's the sexy part of it all, right? And I think now I would say this reminds me, we talked about before we started, it reminds me very much of the Brooklyn Nets and Ben Simmons currently being injured. And then the last year when he was injured, and the year before that when he was injured, and having a really big, ironically, almost $40 million cap hit. And Doug and I have talked about on Locked On Nets about like, it's like, what would you attach to him just to get him off the books, just to have that $40 million in cap relief? Now you need to find one, a team that has that ability, and two, determine like how much does it take. It can't take a first round pick. That's a fridge too far. But for the right amount of assets, and we discussed this example ahead of time, the Atlanta Falcons, who took a guy that I was pretty high on coming out, and we had Darian Beavers, who also went to the school in Cincinnati, and unfortunately he didn't pan out for the Giants. But maybe Desmond Ritter, who they seem like they've said we're going to move on here, and he wasn't a high end draft pick. But Daniel Jones, for a team that is going to be in this gap spot, what does it take? What do you attach to him to maybe have Atlanta say, yeah, we'll eat that money for you for 1 year, because we can maybe make a case, whether it's Taylor Heineke or maybe they go to the market for somebody or they're going to draft their next guy. We might not need to do too much to this team where we need all that cap room immediately in this upcoming offseason.
Yeah, you look at someone like Atlanta, I think that's a perfect example where they're like, we just need a little bit better QB play. We have a little bit of cap space because we're not paying for a quarterback now. Like, can Daniel Jones be better? He's been to a playoff game. He's won a playoff game before. Like, if we squint hard enough, can we convince ourselves that Jones can get us further along than Ritter can, and we don't have to give up massive compensation in order to do it? Then all of a sudden you say, for a 5th-round pick, would they trade a 5th-round pick to the Giants for Daniel Jones in order to absorb his contract and say, we know that there's an out after year 2. It's going to be a $15-20 million out. We can absorb that because it gives us a better chance to win now. If the Giants are drafting in that top 2 or 3 spot, it almost resets the clock 2-for-1, where it allows them to move their quarterback that they're paying high money off the books and allows them to actually build a team around someone like Drake May or Caleb Williams if there was another taker for Jones's contract.
Yeah, I listen, man. You brought this up, and I think it genuinely is like a fascinating angle, because there's going to be very few teams. Now, when you put in that layer of like, does Atlanta think that Daniel Jones is marginally better than Desmond Ritter? Man, I think a year ago, gosh, yes, so many teams would have this discussion. Now, I think it's a lot harder perceptually when you put the money on top of it. But now the Giants would have to eat some of this, the dead cap and the trade and everything. It's still going to cost the Giants something, but functional cap space, when the Giants know they're going to have a lot of money to spend this offseason. And to your point, rookie quarterback coming in, maybe we want to stop messing around with these draft picks for offensive linemen. And we just want to go out and say, you are the best lineman on the market. You are our starting right tackle, our starting guard, whatever the case may be. Right. So this would be very interesting to me. It rarely happens. Now, in other sports like NBA, things like this happen. Bodies get moved all around at the trade deadline, and money and picks and all kinds of considerations. It's a lot harder at the NFL with the way that they're constructed. And yet, this one is very intriguing to me, because there is a very reasonable world where the Giants can end up at this spot and then take a flyer on, as we mentioned, a Jordan Minshew, a Brissett, and say, hey, we're going to bring you in. Maybe it's Tyrod Taylor coming back for a year, right? Like, let's just see. Let's try to do what we wanted to do this year, which was continue the evaluation process of our roster and not necessarily have this thing hanging over our head, which is, We don't necessarily believe anymore that Daniel can be that guy for health and other reasons. And we also know that our organization is probably a couple of years further away than we maybe sold everybody on, which I think is the most frustrating thing for a lot of Giants fans is you sold us on Daniel Jones is the dude, and we're ready to ride. Bring in Darren Waller. Bring in Bobby Okereke. Bring in Paris Campbell. Night, night. We're going to the playoffs, right? And look at us. The wheels have fallen completely off, and we are standing in the middle of the freeway with a tire iron in one hand and 16 flats on our car going, what happened? The kids are crying in the back seat. The dogs peed all over the sandwiches. It is a disaster. That being the case, we're still going to cover the Giants.
This offseason,
yeah,
this offseason is critical for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. If I mean, as we know, if they draft the wrong quarterback or they make the wrong decision by not drafting a quarterback and whatever they decide at the quarterback position doesn't work, either way, they are going to be heavily scrutinized and they likely will not be passed next year if whatever quarterback doesn't look the right part. So
and it's very funny, man. Right. When you draft a QB, you usually get a 2-year, chance to review. So that would be then 4 years for these two guys. But in the process, they would have given out a massive contract, said he was, and is not now the franchise quarterback. It'll be insane. And it'll be John Mayer at the top of all of this saying, do I bail out after the 3rd year? Is it after the 2nd year? We've done that now, chapter and verse, time and time again. Listen, guys, what you're going to want to do is get over to YouTube to One Giant Podcast, on X at One Giant Podcast, at Andy Mac 214, at Adam Armbrecht. This is what we're going to do. It's about what's happening week to week and also what's going to be happening in the big picture. There's a lot of other decisions that are going to get made. Free agency at other positions, not the QB spot, the draft beyond that 1st round pick. So we're having a lot of fun doing this. This I knew for a fact was going to go off the rails in this discussion, but in a very beautiful and productive way. So do all those great things. Get us on the podcast feed. And until next time, man, for better or worse, as Andrew Mackowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.